Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times. I'm coming to you today from the Vancouver Convention Centre. Behind me is the Convention Centre East, which is the site of the 2026 AMEBC Exploration Roundup, the second largest mining conference in Canada. All of the important figures are there. Premier David Eby spoke this morning to the assembled crowd. The president of AMEBC, former BC MLA Todd Stone, spoke. And I'd like to discuss with you what was said at the meeting and what the state of play is in the mining industry in British Columbia right now. So if the pundits are to be believed in mainstream media and global news, the talking points of the BC NDP government now are that mining is going to be our path out of the tariff crisis that the country has been put in by Donald Trump. There's huge tariffs on lumber. We're facing all kinds of economic hurdles related to our trading relationship with the United States. So how do we find our way out of this? Well, it is believed now that the way out is through mining. And there are a tremendous number of large mines that are in the stages of approval and development in British Columbia, particularly in the north. A major mine extension, the Mount Milligan mine in northern BC, was announced or being recently trumpeted by David Eby as a huge success story. However, the spin on this could, if viewed in the reverse, could be that the headline could be something like, BC NDP does not shut down an existing mine. So when an existing mine is extending its operations, it may have found new reserves or resources, and then they have to apply for a new permit. So to radically change from their original permit. So they did fast track it, but this is not the kind of breakthrough permitting win that they're trumpeting it as, because it is an existing mine. Same thing at Highland Valley. Copper, which is also got a major mine expansion in the works that they're working closely with the BC government. So these existing mines being extended, it's good news for the industry, but it's not the kind of thing a victory lap should be taken on. This should be just an obvious green light for the province of BC. There's no new mine, it's just an existing mine keeping going. So let me talk about the comments of Todd Stone. He's the new president of what used to be called the BC Yukon Chamber of Mines. Now it's got a kind of a hard to say name, AMEBC, Association for Mineral Exploration for British Columbia. He had kind of an elbows up speech about how we're going to fight back on the tariffs, and he was quoting Mark Carney's speech in Davos and going on about how the Canada doesn't live because of the United States. It was a very kind of feisty. He sounded like he was quoting the federal liberal talking points in his remarks. But again, it's the same thing. Same theme of critical minerals being strategic advantage to Canada to sort of help Canada be its own country and become more independent on the world stage, and how British Columbia is critical for that, because most of the copper mines. So let me talk about critical minerals for a bit. What are critical minerals? The expression critical minerals derives somewhat for a couple of reasons. One is the green energy future relies on specific elements, so specific metals, and the primary one being copper. For a windmill or electric car or any kind of electrified grid, massive amounts of copper are going to be required. So copper is seen to be a critical mineral, and British Columbia is the site obviously copper is required for any kind of green future, electrification of the planet. So where is all the copper in Canada? Most of the large copper deposits are in British Columbia. There's various different types of deposits. And the price of copper has been increasing dramatically of late. It's gone over $6 a pound, which, a couple of years ago it was around $3, so it's almost doubled. But here's the thing. We are at a historic point in the price of gold. So, kind of the elephant in the room is that why is no one on the platform, including David Eby, talking about gold? Because gold, most of the exploration and mining projects in the province of BC are gold projects. Gold, if I said it before, I'll say it again. It is now over $5,000 per ounce as we speak. A historic moment. So why don't they talk about gold? Because there is no environmental woke patina around gold that they can brag about. The strategy amongst politicians now is to talk about critical minerals because somehow it's acceptable to be mining critical minerals because it's somehow contributing to decarbonization of the planet. When the reality is, most of the money being invested in BC right now is for the gold. So why are we so ashamed of the gold projects in this province? The other kind of unfortunate part of the elbows up, we're going to get the Americans. They were literally playing through the speakers the Guess Who song, American Woman. A very anti-American song, as, they're rousing up the crowd. Well, here's the problem with that kind of, there's the Americans, then there's us and them, is that the large projects in this province many of them are owned by U.S. companies. For example, Newmont owns the Red Chris mine. Newmont owns a number of very large projects in this province, and we've recently had it. And so let me talk about, it's not just the American companies that are basically taking over Canadian companies, and it's long been a very welcome sign that Americans have wanted to invest in this province. The mining industry has been courting U.S. investment since time immemorial. So it's nothing new that American companies are investing here, but why do we want to send out signals that we're all elbows up about Americans? We need American investment in this province and in this country. So it's not the government of America investing, but it's the investment funds. So another big piece of news in the mining world, particularly in Vancouver, that was talked about this morning, both by Eby and Todd Stone, was the merger. They're calling it a merger, but it's effectively a takeover of Teck Resources by Anglo American, and this merged entity will be called Anglotech. And because it was an incredibly large takeover of a Canadian company, was subject to the Canadian Competition Bureau review, and that review recently approved the merger proceeding based on certain conditions. And one of those conditions was that Anglotech would have its head office here in Vancouver. This is very important. There was another gold company called Goldcorp that was taken over by Newmont several years ago, and Newmont is based in Denver, Colorado. So the head office got ripped right on out of Vancouver and sent on down to Colorado. So the officials from some of the city councilors from Vancouver were here sort of touting what is very significant for Vancouver is that this combined entity, Anglotech, will be the largest corporation ever to be headquartered in Vancouver. So we have this kind of, well, we're going to be independent, we're going to be, standing up for Canada, but no one's talking about the fact that these companies are being taken over by foreign entities. So that is part of the story here. Here's the other wrinkle in the story that didn't really get talked about by David Eby or Todd Stone. It was brought up by Todd Stone somewhat. He said to really the only applause he got during his remarks was when he said, we need to have land use policies in this province that allow access by juniors and all mining companies alike to more land. Subtly referencing, he wasn't very on the nose in his comments, but he's subtly referencing the sort of the handover of control of projects to Indigenous people and the concerns about DRIPA upending property rights in the Cowichan decision. Wasn't very on the nose about it. The concerns that the investment community has about private property and land use and this constant encroachment and this uncertainty surrounding free, prior, and informed consent. What does that really even mean? That's in the DRIPA legislation. So this is the backdrop of this mining conference. It's one of the most important roundups, and this conference has been going on since time immemorial. I've personally been to at least 30 of them. But so back to David Eby's remarks this morning. He spoke for about 25 minutes, and he talked about speeding up the regulatory process and that he's got all these policies in place to do this. But then he turned his mind to his remarks to the Indigenous issues. And he says, he used the term partnerships. We've got to develop these projects in partnership with First Nations. Well, here's the problem with that, kind of stating it that way. The projects have always been in partnership with First Nations. There's never been a time where, in the last 20 or 30 years, where it hasn't been seen as there has been overlap and collaboration with First Nations. It is not a new thing to talk about working with First Nations people. After all, mines are unique in the world. They're very local. You cannot move a mining project. It is where it is. And the local population are the obvious employees. It is just an economic and symbiotic relationship that First Nations people have with mining because the jobs are near them. And employers want people who are in the community. There's just a natural tendency in the mining industry to want to help local communities and local people. It's a feel-good factor for people in the industry. So it's nothing new that David Eby and the NDP are suddenly wanting to do So when he says partnerships, what does he mean? So here's the problem with this great mining expansion. They're literally looking to mining to save BC from Donald Trump and save us from economic ruin and this kind of uncertainty and sort of prop up Canada as being this great resource superpower. Well, how do you do that? How do you secure the investment if you are providing a veto to First Nations governments when you don't even know who those governments are? Band councils often change every 2 years. They have votes. They're incredibly political. Who exactly are we partnering with? Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be... They're talking about allowing First Nations to dictate environmental policy or various employment policies. There's all kinds of policies that have to be, there's a lot of unanswered questions. So the question is, does the public trust David Eby and the BC NDP to, steer the ship and get all of these projects on hand? One more thing about the Teck Anglo-American merger, very significant when the Canadian government put these conditions on approving the merger. One was that the newly formed company would be required to spend about $10 billion in Canada over 10 years and $4.5 billion in the next 5 years. And I can't remember the exact figure. It's around in excess of $3 billion, like $3.5 billion, is to be spent in British Columbia. So there's a number of projects. There's the Highland Valley Copper Mine. They're going to spend billions there. Also the Galore Creek Mine, the Shaft Creek Mine. So all of this money is going to be poured in, but it remains to be seen whether or not the First Nations will permit it. All of the leverage and power over these projects, the future of Canada, the elbows up, and it's all been sort of delegated to First Nations in such a way as is completely unclear as to how that's going to work. So here's the thing I would say, and finally, for people who might not be that experienced or understand the mining industry that much, that is really important here, is that all of the mines that are supposedly going to usher in a new age of prosperity for BC, it's not as if they haven't been doing that for a long time, but all of these projects relied on exploration, and this is the key. There's a difference between exploration and mining. This is an exploration conference, the Mineral Exploration Association of BC. So let's talk about, say, a mine like the Galore Creek Mine in northwestern BC. That project was discovered in the 1950s, and it was nursed along over a period of decades by various small companies or bigger companies, and it went through a lot of heartache, a lot of false starts, and billions invested. Well, here's the thing. All of that money was invested to bring the mines to their current stage under a different set of rules about ownership of those mineral rights and resources. In other words, we're seeing the ushering in of a whole new paradigm of mineral title, Indigenous partnerships, who gets what, how the pie is going to be carved up, and all of this is going to be dictated by government. That's not how these mines were found or developed. There's a saying in the mining industry, mines are not found, they are made. So all of the making of these mines, Galore Creek, for example, was owned by a company called NovaGold. And they famously fought off a takeover attempt by Barrick, 20 years ago. And then it went into, Teck got involved, and they spent $500 million, and the whole project came to a screeching halt, and the thing has been sitting there for all this time. So all of the money and investment and time, sweat, and all of the massive investments that's going on to bring these. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of talk about the existing mines, these large projects. Well, how did they get there? They got there under a different set of rules. So you could call this moving the goalposts. And that's what the key message is here, is that what we see playing out here behind me at this big mining conference is the mining professionals, the mining community, is just seeing the goalposts constantly move not in their favor. One of the things I talked about some time ago is the claim staking system that was affected by the Katsala case, and I talked about the Knox and the spiritual harms and how the government didn't appeal that decision. Well, this new staking system where you can't really even locate a mineral claim anymore, you can apply to have a mineral claim processed, but then that claim has to be adjudicated and you have to go through this First Nations consultation process. Well, that new system came in last March. So the update is there's about 1/4 of the claims that were applied for have now been processed. So there's 75% of the claims that people have applied for since the staking rules have changed are still in the system. And they were projecting around, there was a 30, 60, 90, 120 days. The idea was going to take a maximum of 120 days to have a claim decision made. Are you going to get your claim or not? Well, turns out that's looking more like 140 days now. And nobody really knows, so it's too early to tell whether the staking system is a complete flop. So that news will play out later on. But that is the message from Vancouver, BC today. One thing's for sure, I think that all the Eby and the other speakers agreed on it, that Vancouver is a global center of mining. And that's not just because of the resources that exist in the province of BC. The miners in BC and the city of Vancouver are exploring globally. So it is a knowledge-based business with geologists, geophysicists, GIS experts, lawyers, accountants, financiers. So it is one of the great places in the world for mining. And do activists like that? No, they don't. You have the organizations like Mining Watch that decries. They did a protest here a few years ago, and the guy said from the megaphone, you can swing a dead cat and hit 10 mining companies, and you can't, as if the location, and they went to all these mining companies and they protested, as if it's like a dirty word. This horrible, dirty, corrupt industry of mining is located here. So that's the sad irony. You have kind of an activist government that is actively funding a lot of the anti-mining activism, and this is the last thing I'll say. There's a lot of media coverage out there that is directly attacking the mining industry. So here we are, it's supposed to be saving the world with our critical minerals and overcoming the tariff war. But you have publications like the Narwhal. You may never have heard of that, but it is an incredibly anti-mining, anti-resource extraction publication that, get this, is funded by Tides Canada. So Tides Canada is now called the Make Way. So if you just go to their grant page, you can find that since 2021, the Narwhal has been given over $270,000 to do what? To attack mining, to distort the truth, to undermine resource extraction, to question everything, and to actively. So this is what the kind of ironic thing that's happening here. You have the BC NDP, which is kind of an activist government. You have David Eby here this morning touting mining as the greatest thing ever in British Columbia. It is the best thing that BC has going for it right now. But on the other hand, they're strangely working against the industry. So how is this thing going to balance out, and how it's going to work out? Well, we'll have to see. My name is David Eby. I thank you for watching. If you enjoy and you appreciate what we're doing at the New Westminster Times, I would invite you to support our work. You can just go to our webpage, newwesttimes.com. Up in the right-hand corner, there's a button that says support our work. And if you feel so inclined, any support we receive is greatly appreciated. We do have costs. It is not free to do what we do. And I thank you for your feedback and for your support.